We're turning attention now to matters that concern the economy. We've got Roman Oseghale, who is a development and economic researcher. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Well, there's been a lot of talk in terms of what we need to do to ensure that we get the economy back on track in the light of the recession and how things maybe not exactly where the authorities were wanted. But you have been digging in, doing some research into the role education can play here. Tell us about it.
Well, if you go back, right, to 1945, after World War II, when the UN was formulated, and the economists sat down and said, look, for a developing economy, you need to invest a minimum of 26% of your budget in education, or 5% of GDP, and 15% in health. Well, apparently, that is supposed to be the roadmap to sustainable development. And at some point in time, Nigeria was on that roadmap. But in 1981, right, we reached our peak. And after that, it nosedived. And ever since, it was supposed to be 5% of GDP. We reached our peak in 1981 at 4.9% of our GDP. And then from 1982, it started nosediving. Till date, we've been investing only 0.8% in education expenditure. And this is what I want you to understand. 26% to education, 15% to health. What does that tell you? It makes up what? 41%. That is to show you how important it is.
This recommendation, I mean, even though I heard lots of people argue about it, but is this supposed to be at the national level, or the states are supposed to follow suit?
Both state and national. What I did, let me tell you what I did, right? What we basically do is, we're business analysts, right? I could come into channels and tell you, go through your processes, your books, and tell you where you've gone wrong, right? Comparing data to both industry and markets. You understand? And at that point, I am supposed to compare what I have seen at channels to other, probably maybe TV stations, and look at the industry standard to see what you guys are doing right or wrong. So what we did was to take Nigeria back 57 years, right? And we started matching data from 1960. And then when we got to the 1970, we found out that Nigeria had started adhering to what the UN said. In 1970, education expenditure was 1.47% of GDP. And then it kept on increasing. By 1981, we had reached an all-time high of 4.9%. And if you noticed, those who schooled in the 70s, right? This was when you had a lot of African countries coming to Nigeria to school, even the Middle East countries. And it was the time when we were ahead of a lot of Asian countries, some African countries, in per capita income. So when we took the nosedive, they started investing in education, and that's why they are ahead of us today.
So what do we do? Okay, I'm just wondering, is this as a direct consequence of investment or lack of it in education alone, or a combination of factors?
It's an education. I tell you, see, education is not an expense. That's the mistake we're making. That's the mistake we're making in this country. It is not an expense. It is an investment. You have kids, right? The two major things you owe your kids. Let's not even bring it down to family level right now, right? What are the two major things you owe your kids? Good education, right? And health. Good education ensures that a child moves out of poverty, right? The health ensures that a child is able to maximize their potentials, right? When those two things are in place, a child has limitless opportunities. And that's the model the Western world have been practicing. So, but we are looking at mineral resources as our wealth. The true wealth of a nation are the people, are the individuals. It's you and I. And that's why the UN said, look, develop your human capital. And when you develop your human capital, it is a limitless opportunity.
Do you think development of human capital is happening at this time?
It is not. It is not.
Okay, now that we're looking at getting ourselves out of recession, is the actions and the steps the government taking at this time, i.e., injecting more forex into the economy, trying to stabilize the naira, coming up with incentives that will suggest that people are moving out of poverty, are all these steps and measures taken from the government not one in the right direction?
They are, but they are short-term goals. I can tell you that. They are going to be short-term goals because it is not going to be a sustainable economic roadmap. Why? There are three factors, right, that drive generic and organic growth in an economy. The first one is innovation. Second, manufacturing. Third is productivity. Do you have any of those three? No. And then to retain those growth, right, you need agencies and institutions, working agencies and institutions, education, healthcare, aviation, security, marine, so tourism. If those things are not in place, right, you will be subjected to capital flight. I tell you, between 2000 and 2010, wealth was created in this country. What happened? Students abroad, Nigerian students abroad, increased from 2007 to 2010 by 71%. Do you know how much we spend paying school fees abroad every year? Apart from the tangible assets, right, we lose. Do you know the amount of intangible assets? A lot of kids that are brilliant that are not coming back. It is not a sustainable roadmap. If we need a sustainable roadmap, all those factors I just told you have to be in place. They are what sustains an economy.
Run me through that again. Those sustainable...
You have three factors, right, that drive generic or organic growth. That's natural. Productivity, manufacturing, and innovation. And then you have agencies and institutions that help you retain the growth these factors generate. Education, healthcare, marine services, aviation, tourism, security. If those things are not in place, you will be subjected to capital flight because those are service providers, right? When you were a kid, where did you go for holidays? You went to the village. I went to Ekpoma. But today, where are we going where are we going for our holidays? We're all going to the US, we're all going to Britain, we're all going to Europe, right? Some of us never went abroad until after secondary school. Or probably maybe you went abroad when you were a kid once or twice, right? But Nigerians are not going to the villages anymore. We're all going abroad. I did an extensive research on the aviation sector. I called Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, you know, they've always been of help, right? And I asked them, okay, did you guys see the trend in the aviation industry between, I think, 2009 and 2013 or 12? And the guy said, well, what trend? I said, local flights decreased by almost 35%, while international flights increased by about 45%. Do you furnish the executive with this data? And he said, yes. I said, no. Do you translate them in economic terms and give to the executive? And he was silent. Of course, I knew they weren't doing that. We're not looking at all this data. We're not looking at the economic indices. We're not looking at the implications on the economy. Whatever we're doing now, right, is just going to be a short-term progress to get us out.
You know, I'm just wondering, I mean, at the time, you know, the 80s, 70s, which you spoke about, that yes, the economy was relatively not as bad as it is now. Does that mean that we actually spent that 26%, or we spent much more than we are now?
Okay. In 1981, our GDP was 61.1 billion, right? Our education expenditure was about a little bit over 3 billion. If you calculate that, it gives you 4.9%, right? If your GDP is 61.1 billion, right? I'm sure you don't have a budget of more than probably maybe 8 or 9, $10 billion, right? Or at most, maybe $12 billion, right? Now, calculate 3 billion of 12 billion in education alone. And that will give you a rough idea of the percentage.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Pardon me, we need to go to break, but we'll be back and get more on this in a moment. Don't go away.